Hello, everybody. My name is Chelsea Glass from the Heart of Travel, and I am going to be joining you on our upcoming trip to Cuba in January of 2023. And I am so excited to share Cuba with you. It is a country super near and dear to my heart. My husband is from there. We met there. A lot of his family still lives there. And it's also a country that I've been working in the tourism and industry since 2016. So I'm super excited. Cuba is a very misunderstood and misrepresented country. It's very complex. Um, I learn something new every single day that I'm there. And I really can't wait to have some really interesting dialogue and get everybody together in the group to meet a lot of our Cuban friends and providers so that you can get a really wide range of perspectives on Cuba and then hopefully come to some of your own conclusions about a country that has been a bit of a mystery for a lot of people for a long time. Okay, muy bien. So in this presentation, I just wanted to go over some important things to keep in mind so you have some clear expectations going into our trip. And that way, if there's anything that I don't answer in this video or in the documents that I'm going to be emailing along with it, we still have a month so that you can go ahead and submit questions. So I'm going to start off with just some basic information. Like many parts of Latin America, in Cuba, you typically are not putting the toilet paper into the toilet. You're going to be placing it in the basket that is located next to the toilet. So this is very standard. Keep in mind that the pipes in Havana are 500 years old in many homes, and they just don't have the plumbing system to handle that mass amount of toilet paper. So toilet paper in the basket, please. Tap water is safe for bathing as well as for brushing your teeth. However, we do not recommend drinking the tap water in Cuba. And if you are very sensitive, if you have a sensitive stomach, or if you're nervous about getting sick and you want to brush with bottled water, go for it. I personally brush with tap water and I haven't had any problems. Clean drinking water will be made available to you. And if you have a reusable water bottle, we ask you to please bring it with you so that we can have larger, what we call garrafones de agua, and we can fill up your water bottles for you when we're on road trips or when we're out for long periods of time. Unfortunately, you are going to see a fair amount of single-use plastic in Cuba, and it's not always going to be possible for us to get larger tubs or like jugs of filtered water. And so there are going to be opportunities where if you order water at a restaurant, it's going to come in a plastic water bottle. So just a heads up, we're going to do our best to try and reduce the amount of single-use plastic, but Cuba is one of the countries where you just have a little bit less option. But we're definitely going to do our best and are open to also hearing if people have some ideas or maybe bringing like one of the life straws or something like that could be an option that some people might want to explore. Okay, this one's super important. You will not be able to use your US credit or debit card. You're not going to be able to get money out of an ATM. This is a US imposed law. Sometimes people are curious, like why that is. That's part of one of the many things that is inside the embargo. And so the good news is it's not a huge deal. All you're going to have to do is bring down cash and then exchange it. Now, the Cuban economy is a bit of a puzzle, and we're going to talk about this a lot on the trip. But for now, something important to know is that currently Cuba is just using one currency. They used to have a second currency called the CUC. They've eliminated that. So now they have their one currency, and then there's also a digital currency that is very used for something specific. We'll talk about it on the tour, but it's not important for right now. What you need to know going into it is that the Cuban currency right now that is being used is the Cuban peso. But what's interesting is if you look up the exchange rate right now on, say, Google, the official exchange rate is around 24 to 25 Cuban pesos per US dollar. However, that is not the actual exchange rate that is being given when you are working with people in the private sector, or if you're eating at a privately owned restaurant. It's actually a fairer exchange rate. So, for example, instead of getting 25 Cuban pesos for one US dollar, they're valuing the US dollar at somewhere between 120 to 170 Cuban pesos. This fluctuates, and it can fluctuate pretty frequently, and not necessarily every place is going to have the same rate because this is not an official like standardized exchange rate, but this is somewhere in that range of what the private businesses are using as their exchange rate. So basically, the easiest thing is for you to just exchange money through us. So you can say, hey, I want to exchange $200 into Cuban pesos. And usually within a few hours or maximum the next morning, we can have that available to you because we have relationships with different people who will do like private exchange. A week before we depart, I'm going to email everybody and say, hey, if you want to have X amount of money ready to go ahead of time, You can just send me an email of how much, and that way I can have it ready for you the day that you arrive, and then you can just pay us in cash in US dollars. Also, if you have euros, a lot of Cubans are interested in taking euros as well, and so you can exchange euros. So if you have any from a last trip and you want to bring some euros with you, feel free to. Wi-Fi is available at the Casa Particulares. It's not necessarily super strong or available in every room, but usually there's going to be an opportunity or an option to log onto Wi-Fi. Keep in mind that not every website's going to work. Streaming websites might not work due to poor internet speeds, and things like US government websites or online banking websites typically are not going to work from Cuba unless you're using a VPN. Your tour leaders like myself, like Emmanuel, like Chiva, some of the other people that you're going to meet, we will have data on our phone with a Cuban line, which means that we can connect to the internet a little bit more easily. So if you need to send out an urgent message or something like that, we are available to help with that. And also AT&T just started offering a roaming package in Cuba. I have not looked into the details yet. I cannot imagine that it would be very cost effective, but if you do have AT&T, you can look in and see. I was just there a few weeks ago, and I have T-Mobile, and there was no option for data. I was able to make calls and send like green text, but it's expensive. Okay, our itinerary is medium paced, I would call it on this. It's not one of our most fast paced itineraries. We have a nice balance of downtime for rest or for independent exploration. We've tried to put in a couple later morning starts, like a 10 a.m. start as opposed to 9 a.m., just to give people a little extra time. So in general, this itinerary is pretty laid back. There are going to be a couple days where we need people to be a bit more punctual, and we'll let you know, and we ask that you just try your best to be on time those days when it is a little bit more important that we start right on time. That being said, we do ask that on occasion, we'll try not to, but on occasion, things can be 5 or 10 minutes delayed. It's hard to sometimes calculate things like traffic or lining things up with all the different providers. And so just we ask your patience. That being said, Cuba tends to be a little bit more on time than a lot of the other Latin American countries that we run in. So tardiness and traffic jams and those kinds of things that maybe you've experienced in Guatemala with us, they're not as much of a problem in Cuba. Muy bien. Most of the activities are optional. So if you would like to sit something out, or if you need to modify an activity due to mobility, an allergy, just a personal preference, come and talk to me or talk to one of the other tour leaders, and we will do our absolute best to accommodate you. We really want everybody to have fun and to have their trip in Cuba be what they're wanting. And so as much as we can personalize things and modify stuff within the group so that everyone has the experience they're looking for, we're here to do that. So please just let us know. Stay safe. Cuba is one of the safest countries in the Western Hemisphere. It's very easy to walk around. You can walk around pretty much at any time, day or night. Very low crime rates, particularly low crimes against tourism. What you might see are more people like kind of, not like scam you, but just kind of like hustlers, like trying to kind of like sell services, like independent guide services and things like that on the street. Or maybe like take you to a restaurant where they get a commission. But in terms of crime or violent crime against tourists, it's very, very, very low. So you should feel very safe in Cuba. That being said, we just appreciate making sure that you communicate ideally to a tour leader if you're going to go off and do your own thing, especially at night, just so we know and we have kind of an idea of when to expect you back, those types of things. Everyone's adults, so we trust everybody to make good decisions, but we are here if you need anything, and we would love to just kind of know people's plans so that we can make sure that everybody stays safe. We're going to have a first aid kit on us, so if you need something or if you get into any type of fall or you scrape yourself up, if you're having an upset stomach, those types of things, come let us know. Keep in mind that you are not going to be able to just go into a pharmacy in Cuba and get whatever medication you need. So if you have to take any over-the-counter medication, or if you are somebody who is, might want to take a Benadryl or a Dramamine or these types of things, I would say please, please, please bring them. We will have some medications in our first aid kit, which if you want to come and take it out of the first aid kit and administer to yourself, you're welcome to do. But we are not necessarily going to be able to find something at a pharmacy. So we will be bringing bug spray and sunscreen, some basic medications, our first aid kit with bandages, all of those types of things. But if you have like a particular type of medicine that you like in case you start feeling like you're having a cold or an upset stomach or a headache or whatever, highly recommend bringing some of your own stuff as well, because it is not easy to source in Cuba. And then, yeah, Cubans are super friendly. So they'll most likely greet you if you're walking by. They can be very loud, very boisterous, very full of life. Obviously, these are generalizations, but in general, Cuban culture tends to be kind of very loud. They can also be very direct. Sometimes you might even think that they're being like, is this confrontational? A lot of times it's not, even if it maybe seems like, just because there's so much expression and animation in the way that Cubans like to speak, but they're extremely, extremely friendly and welcoming. And definitely, if somebody says hi to you, you can feel free to saludar, hola, buenos dias, buenas tardes, these kinds of things. And you're going to have lots of opportunities to meet Cubans and interact with them in different parts of our trip. So you're definitely going to feel immersed in the culture. Okay, another question that we get a lot is, should I bring a donation? Donations are always welcome. Cuba is a place that it is hard to find things that you need, even if you might have the funds to buy them. There isn't always a lot of availability. There's often not very much selection. And so lots of things can be useful. So really almost any type of donation could be well received. But here's a list of some of the common things that would be particularly useful and can be hard to find and are kind of like basic necessities that people need. In terms of dropping off donations, typically what we do is we take our donations to Vinales and we get together with our local contact, Yenny, and she, with her neighbors, including one of the local elementary school teachers, they get together and they help to distribute the donations to different families, particularly in an area about 25 minutes outside of Vinales where people were pretty affected by the recent hurricane. So we typically do not take a bunch of time to visit homes and drop the donations off personally, kind of more out of respect for the privacy of the people receiving the donations. But if you want to be involved in helping to sort donations, if you want to talk to Jenny and some of the other people and learn more about where the donations are going, you're very much welcome to do that. And if there is somebody who does want to accompany Jenny or myself on a donation drop, that's definitely something that we can talk about. So just reach out to me one-on-one. And if that's something that you're wanting to do, we can talk a little bit more about what that day looks like and how that would work. Again, if you don't have room in your suitcase, if you're not in a position right now to bring a donation, that's okay. It is 100% optional, but it's a question that comes up a lot, and it does help to comply with the support for the Cuban people travel category, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a moment. So I would recommend bringing something if you can, and that way you also are complying with support for the Cuban people. Which takes me into our travel requirements. So a lot of people are nervous about, well, is it really legal to travel to Cuba? What is the process like? I will say that in general, I think it's much easier to travel to Cuba legally than a lot of people think. I have flown in and out of Cuba probably close to 25 or 30 times at this point in my life in the last 7 years almost. And I have, knocking on wood, haven't had any issues. We've only ever once had a gentleman who, on a very recent trip, he had a bottle of rum and some cigars confiscated, and he knew that those purchases were risky. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what things you can and cannot bring back from Cuba in just a moment. And ultimately, the worst thing that happened was he unfortunately lost his items, which is a huge bummer. But again, it was a calculated it was like a known risk, his decision. So what are the steps to traveling legally to Cuba? Well, sign up for a trip and book your flight. And I recommend booking your flight with a U.S. commercial airline unless you're going to be traveling from another destination, in which case maybe you would fly with Aeromexico or Copa or another airline that transits through, like, say, Mexico City or Panama. But for most of you, you're going to be grabbing a commercial airline flight, leaving from the United States and going into Havana. And you've signed up for a trip that has a structured itinerary that is compliant with the OFAC rules and regulations for support for the Cuban people. Support for the Cuban people basically aims to encourage or somewhat require travelers to support small businesses and the private sector in Cuba as opposed to the Cuban government, and to engage in meaningful interactions with Cubans. So we're going to be doing those things even regardless of this OFAC requirement. But we will talk more about why this requirement's in place and the things that we agree with about this requirement and all the complexities around it. But just remember that support for the Cuban people is the general license that you're traveling to Cuba under. So anytime that someone asks for like your purpose of travel, reason for travel, what are you doing? You're going to say support for the Cuban people. Typically, you're going to have a drop-down menu to choose from that's going to show you the 11 different categories, and support for the Cuban people is the one that you want to choose anytime you're asked, what is your purpose of travel to Cuba? We are also going to provide you with a very like a more official and like super detailed version of our itinerary with addresses and phone numbers and more specific stuff, so that in the event you are ever asked to show your itinerary to an immigration official before leaving the United States or upon re-entry, you can say, this is what I did, or this is what I'm doing, blah 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 blah, and they can review that itinerary. Again, we have never had any issues. Just one gentleman who recently upon return did have to give up his bottle of rum. So like I said, you have your flight and you've booked a tour. Now, the day of your flight, I highly recommend getting to the airport early. Online check-in typically is not available or does not work for Cuba. So please just go to the airport early and make sure you have all your paperwork in order. I'm going to tell you what you need in just a second, but make sure you get there early. And when you check in person, you might be given some type of affidavit to sign up, to fill out and sign. Or depending on the airline, they might send it to you electronically in an email and the days leading up to your flight. So double check. If you don't get anything prior to to your flight via email, just get to the airport early that morning, and that day they can do your check-in there. They will most likely ask to review any of the documents that are required in order to be travel ready for Cuba. And so we're going to talk about what those documents are right now. So the most important document that you're going to have to fill out before you head to the airport, I really recommend filling this out prior to leaving your house, just in case if you have any Wi-Fi issues, is the De Viajeros form. So the De Viajeros form is a government-issued form. The Cuban government requires everybody to fill this out. It's partially for contact tracing. It's something they started doing during the pandemic, but it has a few other questions as well. It's very simple. I'm going to show you right now. You just go to this link, fill out the form. It's going to generate a QR code, and you're going to want to have that saved on your phone or printed out, or as like a PDF somewhere on your phone, so that you can show this potentially upon check-in in the United States, but definitely upon arrival in Havana, you're going to have to show this QR code. So, let's get an idea. You're going to go to this website, De Viajeros, and you're going to go to form request. Now, keep in mind, you can only do this 48 hours before your flight. So if it's more than 48 hours until your flight, you will not be able to fill out this form. Like, it won't let you select the correct date. So you're going to be filling this out anywhere from right before you go to the airport, or about 44 hours before that, something like that. And so make sure you fill that form out. I'm going to go back here. Sorry. So you're going to need to have that form filled out. The other thing that you're going to need at some point on your travel day is your tourist card or visa. Now, this one is interesting. A lot of people get nervous about this. Do I have to apply for a visa? It's very easy. In fact, I typically just buy my visa the day of travel at the airport. However, you can purchase it ahead of time online. It's a little bit more expensive because the price of the visa can fluctuate slightly depending on what airline you're flying with and the airport. If you do happen to fly through Mexico or Panama, it's significantly cheaper. It's closer to $25 or $30. In the US, it's going to be usually between $55 and $85. It's $85 if you purchase it ahead of time online, but then it gets mailed to your house and you have that peace of mind. That being said, I recommend just purchasing it the day of at the airport, unless you have a crazy tight layover or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you, just so you have an idea of what it looks like. It's going to look like this. And it's super easy to fill out. Just your last name, your first name, your date of birth, your passport number, and the country that issued your passport, or the country that you're a citizen of. Let's go back here. So again, like I said, you're going to buy this in the last port of exit. So if you're flying, let's say, from Los Angeles to Miami, Miami to Havana, typically you're going to buy your visa in Miami. And usually you're going to buy it at the gate, or there's going to be a little kiosk very nearby in that area where the flights to Cuba are leaving from. And you just go and say, hey, I need the visa. You pay. You can pay usually with card or cash. You fill it out and you keep it with you. They're going to want to see that upon boarding that flight into Cuba, and you're going to need to show that upon arrival in Cuba. when you check in person, say in the example of Los Angeles, Miami, Havana, I would still ask upon check-in LA, just in case. It's unlikely that they're going to have the visa there on the premise and be able to sell it to you. They will most likely just confirm that you can get it in Miami, but I always ask just in case. So it's the day of your trip. You go to the airport, you've got your flight confirmation, you can prove your return flight, you have your itinerary printed out. You may or may not already have your visa on you, or you might be buying one in the next few hours. You have filled out your De Viajeros form, and you have potentially filled out some type of online affidavit stating your purpose of travel, or you will be given something to fill out at the airport. Okay. You fly. If you have a layover, you might be buying your visa there, depending on your situation. Upon arrival to Cuba, you're going to have to show, typically, hand them your passport, the visa that you've purchased. They might want to see your return flight home. Unlikely, but could be. That's typically what is going to happen. It's rare that they're going to ask questions beyond that. If so, you can just say, I'm here on a support for the Cuban people trip. Muy bien. And then the one last thing that sometimes people ask about is health insurance. Does Cuba require health insurance, like Cuban medical insurance, when you're traveling there? Technically, yes. But if you are flying on a U.S. commercial airline, that's already included in your ticket. Therefore, your boarding pass basically serves as proof of that. If you're flying through another country like Mexico or Panama, in which case you'd be flying most likely with Copa Airlines or Aeromexico, it is not included, in which case you can buy it online ahead of time. You can buy it upon arrival at the airport, although you would have to be paying in euros. Or honestly, they typically do not check. The only time I was ever asked for insurance of my many, many times was when I was like 8 months pregnant going into Cuba. So it's completely up to you. Technically, you should have it. And it just means that in the event you need any medical care in Cuba, that it's covered. I can't remember the exact price right now, but it's very affordable. I think when I had to pay one time for a 3-week visit, it was around $70 US, something like that. What is a casa particular? This is another question that comes up a lot. Casa particulares are private residences that have been turned into kind of like bed and breakfast or almost like boutique hotels. Like we said, or like I said earlier, we're going to talk a lot about the complexities of the Cuban economy, but most businesses in Cuba technically belong to the government, and most people in Cuba work for the state and are on a set government assigned salary, which is usually not very high, maybe $60 US a month. However, there is a small private sector, and the small private sector really started with the tourism sector. So restaurants, privately owned, people who have a vehicle and started offering taxi services, people who started to do some renovations and rent rooms out in their homes. So a long time ago, or not too long ago, but traditionally the Casa Particular was a little more like a homestay, where you really felt like you were staying in a spare room at a family's home. Over time, it's evolved a little bit more into more of kind of a bed and breakfast experience, where it's still a privately owned residence, but your host may or may not live on site. And typically, if they do, their room is kind of like a little bit further, like there's a division. You're going to have your own room. So unless you're sharing with a roommate, you'll be completely alone in your room with your own bathroom. If you have a roommate, you'll have your 2 beds and your own bathroom. Or if you're traveling as a couple, you'd have 1 bed and again, your private ensuite bathroom. You're going to be provided with sheets, with pillows, with pillowcases, with towels, with probably a small bar of soap. Shampoo and conditioner can be hit or miss, and even if they do have it, the quality is often not super high, so I recommend bringing your own toiletries. You're going to have AC. A lot of times you'll have a fan in there as well, but things can be kind of simple, so it's usually the Casa Particulares are like very clean, chic, but pretty simple. The ones in Viñales usually aren't quite as stylish. They're a little bit more rustic, a little bit more homey. There's no such thing as an IKEA or a Target or anything like that. They're very limited on where they can buy linens, on the quality of things. Things can be very expensive. So keep in mind that you're going to be staying in some of the best, housing available in Cuba, without going like crazy, because there are some government-owned hotels that are like 6-star level accommodation. But again, that is not what the general public in Cuba or even the average traveler in Cuba is going to be staying in. A casa particular, like the ones you can see here, is representative of the kind of place you're going to be staying in. It's a great way to generate additional income for a family. You get to have some nice interactions. You're provided with a nice breakfast every morning. If you need anything, they're there for you. There's cleaning service. There's typically going to be a safe if you need one. And if that is something that you need, please let us know so we can ensure that we have one for you. There's going to be water available, as well as some additional beverages for purchase. Typically, you're going to have a mini fridge in your room where you might have some cold water bottles for purchase, or some beer, or some soda. So it's very much like it's a hybrid kind of between a hotel and a homestay. Typically, they're small, anywhere from 4 to 8 rooms. And so with larger groups, we might be divided up. For our smaller groups, like ours here with Heart of Travel, we're hopefully going to all be together in the same casa particular or in 2 casas very close to one another. So this is really, really fun way to support Cubans and kind of have a more realistic experience, but still be living a pretty comfortable and kind of cushy life compared to like necessarily the reality of most Cubans. And I just say that because I want people to really understand that, like, you know, you might be like, oh, this towel is like kind of small, this is kind of thin, but to put in perspective, like it's probably like people really went out of their way to make sure they could get the best for you, you know? Okay, so now I know I've been chatting already for quite a long time. I'm just gonna see where my timer's at. Okay, I think we're good still. Muy bien. Um, I'm going to do a quick breakdown of the itinerary, but I'm not going to go through every single detail. You can definitely read this on your own when you have a chance. But in day 1, everyone's going to just be arriving. When you get to the airport, you will have somebody waiting for you outside of the airport with a sign with your name on it, and will accompany you back to your casa particular in Havana so you can meet up with the rest of your travelers. If you get in early that morning, or if you want to get in the night before even, we can accommodate that. We can set you up with an extra night of lodging. Your airport pickup is still included. And if you need assistance or an additional activity that next morning, just reach out to us and we can help you with that. Once we have everybody in town and safely arrived, we will meet up that evening and head to have a nice welcome dinner. And so this is our first official group activity at a really fun, privately owned restaurant that has delicious, delicious food. And after that, if anybody wants to go out for drinks or live music, your tour leaders will be more than happy to take you out. Day 2, we're going to give you guys a little bit more of a leisurely morning. So you can have breakfast sometime between, 8 and be ready to go by 10. So if you want to sleep in and have breakfast at 9:30, and that works for you to be ready by 10, you can just communicate that to us or directly to your host at your casa particular, and we'll make sure that that's set up for you. At 10, we will be starting our first day in Havana, doing a BC taxi and walking tour. So we'll be doing some walking, but we'll also be riding in style in these little BC taxis right here. And today we're going to talk about kind of a general overview of Cuban history with the goal of trying to understand modern day Cuba and the economic and socio-political context of Cuba. We're going to hit a lot of the iconic points in Havana, as well as talk about some of the realities and a bit of the underbelly of Cuba. For lunch, we're going to go to a place that we love called Malecon 663. And here we're going to have a nice lunch as well as play domino. So we're going to learn how to play domino. And we're going to play domino with a group of friends of mine. And so this is a very authentic experience to play domino with a bunch of Cubans. And so it's going to be fun. And there will be other opportunities to play on the trip. So this is a good skill to master if you want to hang out and interact with locals. So this is definitely a good day to wear super comfortable clothing. It's hot. It can be warm in Havana. January is a really nice month for those of you heading there with us in January. But it's still going to be warmer and more humid than most places that time of year. So you're definitely going to want to use sunscreen. You're going to want to have maybe a hat, sunglasses, not wear like clothing that is too hot, and stay hydrated as well. Muy bien. Later that night, so we finish up around 3, and then you have a siesta. You can take a nap, you can freshen up, you can do your own activity if you'd like. And then at 6:30, we're going to meet up to ride in these cute little cocoa taxis to Vedado neighborhood. And in Vedado, we're going to have dinner at El Cocinero, which is one of my favorite restaurants. And we're going to go to La Fábrica de Arte Cubano. La Fábrica de Arte Cubano is this really cool like bar slash art gallery slash just crazy mixed media space. So there's art galleries, there's theaters. Well, like one theater that oftentimes has black and white or like silent films. There's a dance area where they do dance classes, and then later into the night it becomes more of like a dance nightclub. There's photography, there's sculpture, there's all kinds of unique exhibits. There's indoor and outdoor bars. There's a smaller room for like acoustic live music. It's just a really cool space to check out the art scene, and art being one of the really the most common ways for freedom of expression, and even for, you know, more progressive or even potentially anti-government like thoughts. Like a lot of times you're going to see that expressed more in art. So this is an opportunity to appreciate Cuban artists, modern day Cuban artists. And we're going to have taxis available. So if some people want to go home earlier after dinner, they just want to check out La Fabrica for a little bit, have one drink, see some art, and want to go home, that's awesome. For those of you who might want to stay out later and dance and be out, we can accommodate that as well. So just communicate with your tour leaders. That next morning, we're going to head out around 9. So have breakfast in the morning and be ready to go at 9. And we're going to be driving to Viñales. Viñales is a beautiful part of the Cuban countryside with these really unique rock formations called mogotes. There's these cool limestone kind of mountains that there's really not a lot of other places like this anywhere else in the world. I know China has some of these rock formations, but yeah, it's very unique. So we're going to head to Viñales, stopping on the way at a place called Fusterlandia, another cool Cuban art project. When we get to Viñales, we're going to have lunch at a place called Finca El Paraíso, which is beautiful. It has a beautiful view of Viñales Valley. You're going to go on a tour to learn a little bit more about organic farming in Cuba and have a delicious lunch. Then we're going to get settled into our casas particulares, and you'll have some downtime before a salsa class that evening. And after that, you have the evening free. Most groups end up having dinner together. There's a great tapas restaurant that we recommend. And then sometimes some people will stay out and go dancing that night. So again, it's pretty open-ended, and your tour guides are there to accommodate, accompany, and do whatever we can to make sure that you have a great time in Viñales. That next morning, we're going to go horseback riding, or if you would prefer to hike and walk alongside us, the hike would be fairly mild with some inclines here or there, but for the most part, Viñales is fairly flat. It's pretty easy, walkable terrain. And we're going to be going through just a beautiful part of Cuba until we get to our friend Alejandro's house. And here, him and his family produce tobacco. We're going to be talking about Cuba's tobacco industry. You're going to get a chance to try some honey, some coffee, to see how they roll the cigars. This is a place, if you want to buy Cuban cigars, where you can, because the ones that are purchased here are considered souvenirs, and you're purchasing them directly from the farmer as opposed to getting boxed and labeled cigars from the Cuban government. So if you want to